This is chapter 7 from the same ebook, and we will be covering welfare economics. Welfare economics is the study of how allocation of resources affects economic well being. And generally, we know there are two actors in the economy, consumers and producers. So, we will be covering consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the cases of deadweight loss. First, we begin with consumer surplus. It's the amount a buyer is willing to pay for a good minus amount he actually pays. Or you can say benefit buyers receives from participation in the market. You participate in the market by buying something. So in order to understand consumer surplus, it's very important to know what is willingness to pay. Remember, we all have different willingness to pay depending upon how much we can afford and how much do we value the good. So willingness to pay is the amount you as a buyer is willing to pay for a good or service. So let's suppose if I am willing to pay $800 for a mobile phone, it's not necessarily that you want to pay $800 too. Maybe your willingness to pay for a mobile phone is $600, and maybe your friend's willingness to pay is $500. So, willingness to pay varies person to person. It's the maximum amount or maximum price you are willing to pay for a commodity. Calculating consumer surplus mathematically is very simple. You just need to know information regarding willingness to pay, what is the market price of the commodity, and then you plug in the values in the formula and you get consumer surplus. So in this scenario, let's suppose you want to buy a mobile phone and the highest price you're willing to pay is $800, but this price is within your mind. You do not share it with the shopkeepers that okay, I want to pay $800. No, this willingness to pay is in your mind that this is my range and I will not buy a mobile phone more than this amount. But then you visit the market, you analyze the models and prices, and you're actually getting a phone of only $500. So you won't be saying to the shopkeeper, hey, my willingness to pay is 800, so I will pay 800. No, you buy the mobile for $500. So you plug in the values, it's 800, which was your willingness to pay, minus $500, what you actually pay. So your consumer surplus is $300. So this $300, it's, you can say, a psychological relief or happiness you receive because you were expecting to pay a higher price, but you got something cheaper. So that's why we say it's a buyer's benefit of interacting into the market. Now you're aware what is consumer surplus and how do you calculate it numerically. But how do we depict consumer surplus graphically? For that, you have to draw the demand curve. Remember, consumers and buyers are associated with the demand because demand curve shows the number of buyers who are willing to buy the product at different prices. For example, if price of a commodity increases, few people will buy the commodity, and if price of any commodity decreases, a lot of people prefer buying the good. So following up with the previous example where you want to buy a mobile phone and the highest price you were willing to pay was $800, but you actually paid $500. So you received a consumer surplus of $300. So depicting it graphically, consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. So the market price of mobile phone is 500 and your willingness to pay is 800. So it's the area in between the willingness to pay and the amount you actually paid. So this yellow triangle is your consumer surplus. Now the question arises how consumer surplus changes if price level fluctuates. For instance, if price increases or decreases. So in this scenario, let's suppose the price of mobile phone decreases from 500 to 300 and your willingness to pay is 800. So you notice your consumer surplus has increased from 300 to 500. Why? Because previously you were buying a product at a higher price, but now as the price has decreased, so you're able to get the commodity at a lower price. So all the shaded area, despite of your color, is actually your consumer surplus, but this blue rectangle is your increase in consumer surplus, because previously your consumer surplus was 300, now it has increased to 500. Whereas this new, you can say, this brown little triangle, these are the additional consumers in the market because of a lower price. So when the price was 500, you notice there were 20 consumers, but now the price is 300, so there are 30 consumers. So this additional triangle is additional consumer surplus received due to extra buyers because the price is low. But what happens, let's suppose, if your willingness to pay is equal to the amount you actually pay. For example, if your willingness to pay is $500 and you actually pay $500 for a product. So in this scenario, your consumer surplus would be zero because you won't get any additional relief or happiness that you have saved something. Or let's suppose if your willingness to pay is $200, but the actual price is $500. So in this scenario, you are not able to buy the commodity because you do not value it enough to pay $500. So in that scenario, you won't be able to buy the commodity as well and you won't receive any consumer surplus.